We're here to talk about the role that women play in politics, the role that gender plays, and what we need to do to get more women in and why it matters.
Well, of course, I'm speaking as an American, and I think that American politics is different than French politics is different than politics in some other country. But speaking from the perspective of my country, we have some serious, serious issues. I had a career for decades as an author, as a teacher, as a lecturer, and I never felt in any way limited by my sex. I never felt that there was prejudice towards me. I never felt that my options were limited or anything along that line. But running for office, certainly running for president in the United States, I never knew what the word misogyny was. Not really. I thought I did. Gloria Steinem has a line, misogyny is an invisible sport. And running for president, I almost can't believe it. If I do something, it's described one way. If the exact same thing is done or the exact same experience is happening on the campaign of a man, it's described in a very different way. And I'm sorry to say that it's women who do this as much as men. You know, patriarchal prejudice is it just infuses the culture. And so many women, as we all know, have internalized this kind of misogyny, the dismissiveness, the derision, the casual invisibilization and erasure. When I was first in the 1970s, the feminism of that time, it was understood that feminism was more than the idea that women could get what we needed. It was clear that sisterhood was everything. Sisterhood meant that none of us are getting there unless all of us get there. We have to support one another. But so much of the modern feminism in the United States doesn't seem to include that. So I would say that the state of women, it's difficult. Something happened yesterday. There's a woman named Katie Porter who was running for the Democratic nomination for the Senate in California. And she is it's a Senate seat in California. She's a US Congresswoman now. And there was another Congresswoman and a Congressman named Adam Schiff. And Adam Schiff won, but he won by giving money. It's a system in California where it's the top two. He didn't want to have to be in a runoff with Katie Porter, so he and his campaign gave all this money to the Republican. In other words, it was rigged. So Katie Porter, she didn't go away nicely. She said this was rigged and she called it what it was. Now, a lot of people from the establishment are criticizing her. I'm saying good for her. Those days are over where a woman is going to be treated badly and then just go away nicely for the better cause. And I've seen that in my campaign too. There's subtle ways that a woman should just give it up and acquiesce because the man can do it better or for whatever reason. Anyway, I will end there, but I see that there are deep, deep levels of misogynistic prejudice in American politics beyond what I had realized.
Thank you, Marianne. Manifa, can I come to you? And I'd love you to tell everyone a bit more about Moms Rising in case everyone doesn't know about it or isn't yet part of it.
Yeah, thanks. So Moms Rising is a national organization. We have more than 1 million members. We have members in every state in the nation. And for 15 years, we've been building a base and pushing policies that help to protect women in the workplace, families, had a huge role to play in the fight for greater access to healthcare. Some of the more recent work that we've done is to help pass the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act and the Pump Act to allow women to have breastfeeding accommodations at work. So like a whole range of issues and policies that we work on to make sure that, women have equal pay, women have, United States is the only nation in the developed world that does not have a national paid leave program. So, unless you live in a particular state or your job has it, many women have to return right to work after giving birth or adoption. There's not even a national program to take time for an elder who is ailing. So we really fight hard to put policies in place to make sure that women have, equal access to these career opportunities and are treated fairly in them. And the political landscape is no different than what's happening in academia, or no different than what's happening in retail, or no different from what's happening in communications, right? We see that men make more. There are accommodations for men that don't exist for women. Recently, I know just an anecdote about the political landscape, like in the US Senate, there wasn't even a women's lounge, right? So when a few women started to become US senators, like we don't even have like a bathroom in the main part. They had to create that for incoming members. So the design is there, the infrastructure is already there to discriminate against women. But then in the United States, as well as around the world, we have these intersecting systems of oppression of race and gender, so that when we talk about intersectional feminism, we're talking about how these issues compound one another. So just as far as equal pay, in the United States, for every $1 a man makes, women make 77 cents to that dollar. But once you start to overlay Black women, when you talk about Indigenous women, when you talk about women who sit at this intersection of gender and race, that gap increases to 65 cents to a dollar, then to 55 cents to a dollar, right? Some of the things that equalize this are things like organized labor. In areas where we see there's unions, there's more equal pay. But in general, these gaps persist whether you are a doctor or a waiter. We have these gaps between what men and women are earning. And there's a lot of other discrimination across the board that we can talk about. But yeah, it makes a lot of women don't run for office in the way that Marianne is talking about because, if they have children at home or they have not made as much money in their careers leading up to that point, there's all of these different factors that create obstacles for women, especially Black women and women of color.
Thank you so much. Joan, what is your experience of being female in the political space?
Well, I think I'm going to try and complement what Marianne and Monifa were talking about, because there's another aspect of this that connects to both. And, women and fundraising, there's a big gap in capacity there. So if you want to start a business, entrepreneurial, if you want to run a campaign, if you want to do a C3, it's harder to raise, just the data shows a lot more success with fundraising when you have these connections. A lot of things at certain levels are very much about connections. And the concept of an old boys club is unfortunately sort of real. I see Marianne nodding her head. And it's a tough thing to navigate. And Monifa talked about all the biases against mothers just because of the realities. Women tend to have less non-linear career paths. And that's, over 80% of women become mothers by the time they're 40. If you have a kid, that's a point of departure from a linear career path very often. And we haven't adjusted to the realities of the modern workforce. Because when you talk about, political leadership, there's also leadership in corporations. You don't have enough women in leadership there. And Monifa did a great job talking about how, the other aspects of identity that can impact the ability to move into leadership. And so all these, if you're in leadership in industry, then you have much more capacity to support political leaders. There's all these ways that those in power create more. There's a book I liked the title of, especially, it was The Revolution Will Not Be Funded. And it speaks to something we don't think a great deal about, is how a lot of these capacities to run for office, to start a business, to grow a business or a nonprofit, funding is a part of the equation that's invisible to many. So that's maybe makes a fuller picture here.
Thanks. And just to pick up on something Marianne said about how women's working relationships with women, that it's not just the United States and Britain. Obviously, we know it happens across the world. And there was an incident recently in Southern Australia where one sitting MP congratulated a neighbouring MP who came from a different party on their selection. And to begin with, everyone was, isn't this wonderful, working across parties? But then their party stepped in and they got so much hate and abuse for being friendly to the opposition, for not understanding that there's a war going on out there. So I just wondered if you wanted to talk about the way parties are organised and structured and the way politics is organised and structured that kind of fosters this environment of conflict and toxicity.
If that's for
Would
me,
like to, anyone jump in? Yeah.
I will start on that and let everyone else continue. Doing living room conversations, it's really trying to get us to see each other's humanity, even when we have different political identities. And to go for the aspirational together. We've seen that women do often work together more successfully than men do, but the structure of our politics in the US, and I can't speak outside of the US, and I only speak with some knowledge of the US, it has been pushing us towards more and more polarization. And I believe that we, the citizens, are going to have to step in to make some structural changes that stop pushing towards polarization and start pushing towards really representing our interests, because there's been a divergence. Part of it's because of the media, part of it's because, there are ways to improve our structure that, such as ranked choice voting, where it diminishes the motivation for polarization, but those that are in power would have to implement that kind of change. And so you've got a roadblock there. I would love to see leadership start to step up to how do we change the dynamics and the need to do fundraising is actually a disaster, in my opinion. I could go on about that. Go ahead, Marianne. I can see you want to talk. But you're muted.
I'm sorry, yeah. And in answer, moving with that, answering Jennifer's first question, I think how women treat each other politically is sometimes different in private than in public. Anytime you're dealing with a public face in politics, it is appropriate to be one way. I know when I was in New Hampshire, I was staying at the same, before the New Hampshire primary, I was staying at the same hotel as Nikki Haley. Now, Nikki Haley's politics couldn't be further different than mine. She's very far right. I'm quite a bit left. And but I saw her at the elevator and it was the day of and I said, "Oh, good luck." And she said, "Good luck to you too." And I said something like, "Wouldn't it be incredible? We were both a nominee." She said, "Isn't it time?" And the collegiality between us was definitely there, and she was very nice on a personal level. And clearly we both know that our politics were completely divergent. So I thought that was interesting. I think when Joan is talking about funding, I definitely feel that when this whole thing started, Vivek Ramaswamy had not served in a political office before. Andrew Yang had not served in political office before. No one said, "Oh, you haven't served in political office, therefore I will not take you seriously." I'm absolutely sure that a man at my coming forth like that would have been taken more seriously if I were a man. There's no doubt about it in terms of funding. If you've been a businessman, you're given this like big mocker thing in this society. The next thing I just want to say before I end is, I think we're living in very mean-spirited times. People are mean today, and women as well as men. Sometimes I think women more, because men have been given power for centuries. So it's almost like, and they have war and they have sports. They have rules. They don't have to go beneath the belt so much. Women haven't had power, so we punch from below the belt. There's a meanness in the air, and I think it's on the left as much as on the right. This smug, self-righteous way. I just think all of us, and I think women should be leading the charge. We've all got to get back to our hearts and how we talk to one another, because I don't know, it seems to me that in politics particularly, men have tougher skin. The stuff they say to us, I know it's not just me. It's just so mean out there. It's so mean out there. And women have a really hard time taking that, and the approval and centuries of it's almost like um, it's a real, like, who wants to make themselves vulnerable to that? If you run for office today, the meanness, and we've got to clear that from all our hearts, or the best and the brightest will continue to just stay in the background and say, I'm not exposing myself to that. So there's an outer aspect of all this and an inner aspect. Martin Luther King said we need external changes in our circumstances and internal shifts in our souls. I think that women need to lead the charge and just putting kindness out up front. You can debate someone, you can disagree with someone and not tear down their personhood. And that's become the norm in American politics, and to our deep, deep detriment.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that led to compassion in politics creation was just that belief that when we all act from our better selves, and also how we do politics, if we're in conflict, if we're in a triggered state, if we're in an adversarial environment, we're not going to be able to come up with the solutions that are needed to deal with the complex existential threats that we all face at this moment in history. And Manifa, I just wanted to come to you and what I've noticed when I first started working in the political space 40 years ago, we had 45 female MPs in the House of Commons. And what we thought was, we just need more women. We just need more women, and then it will change. Now we have 225 women in the House of Commons, but those women are facing death threats. They're facing rape threats. They're facing bricks through the windows of their party office. They're facing hostile crowds. And I know women who have left the political space because they don't feel safe. I know women who haven't been able to say their truth because they don't feel safe. And that's such a fundamental threat to democracy if we are not able to speak our hearts and our truths and our minds. And there's a huge intersectional element to that. Certainly the women of colour, the few women of colour that we have in our parliament are subject to much more abuse, and there have been surveys done, and there is no doubt that they're in the worst position. How do you account for this rise in the levels of abuse that women are experiencing, but particularly women in the political space?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I really have a very different take on this idea, as well as some of the comments in the chats about how this is a more divided time, a more tense time, a more abusive time than ever before. I assert that this is a time where the abuses and the divisions are more visible, right? That we can actually see how Black people are treated, women are treated in a more public space. One, because we are in these places, so people can compare how one MP is being treated to another, whereas before, when no one was there, you couldn't tell, right? As well as the democratization of media and communications through like social media, whether it's Twitter, whether it's TikTok. We're able to hear the stories and hear the voices, and we're like outraged, right? We're shocked. We're like, this must be like the meanest times ever. But I always want to tell people that my own mother, who is very young, she is still in the workforce. She teaches school in Houston, Texas, lived in the segregated South in Texas. She had to be bused to a school outside of her community in the 11th grade, where it's horrific how, we see like the same clips and over, but think of that times 50,000, right? In counties all over the country. And so as a Black woman to say, oh, it's more divided now than ever before, it's more hostile now than ever before, we're like, no, this has been, for the United States, I'm speaking, the trajectory of the country going back to 1619. And what's happening now is that we are surfacing the realities, right? And there's a saying that you can't solve what you can't see, right? That's why we push the issues in Moms Rising, sharing the stories, the maternal mortality crisis. Like, why does the U.S. have third world rates of maternal deaths, during labor and delivery, right? And if you talk to my mom, her mom, you will know that there has been medical apartheid going back to forever, ever, right? So I believe that it is awful, and it's terrible, and we should do something about it. But I always want to bring people back to the fact that when Ida B. Wells showed up to that first suffrage march with a delegation of hundreds of Black women from Chicago who were feminists, who were suffragists, they were told they had to march in the back of the march, right? Like, how divided is that? That was like a whole dust up. They had to like push their way to the front of this march that we see this iconic photo of all the time. And again, making sure people know it's not ancient history that we have these divisions, that we have these abuses against women, and that these disparities exist. It's just that now they're in our face, which is why I love Gen Z, right? I have two Gen Z girls, right? Like, everything is like, oh, y'all want to eat dinner? Well, let me tell you that the sky is falling and this is happening, right? You can't just kind of move through like it doesn't exist. And that's more of the time that we're in, I'll say. But in terms of, I'll agree with what Marianne said, and we find this here too, like, we have women that vote against their own interests, right? Who, I don't necessarily know that more women in some of the places of power will equate to the destruction of these systems that we know are harming our communities. I think it's that, and like, it's not just that, because we've seen in the last couple of cycles, right? These states that have not expanded Medicaid, but hospitals are closing, and labor and delivery centers, there's like a birthing desert in some states, and there's
With women governors.
and there's women governors, and there's women that are electing the policymakers that are creating these conditions. So we got a lot of work to do. And I always love to see the diversity in these places of power, because I think that is part of the solution, but it's not the whole piece.
I really agree with Monica, and on all of this, there's a big both and. And I think not only are some of the things that you were talking about, Monica, coming back again, but I think even on ancient levels, I know a lot of what I've experienced has made me feel about witch burnings, like it's the Middle Ages or something. The projection onto me, she's crazy. She's crazy, she's crazy and she's like a witch. I mean, it's almost like they're describing a witch in like 1560 or something. And then, of course, leading her to the stake to be burned, and people saying she's a witch, she's a witch. I mean, it's like, I think sometimes in modern society, we have this, we pretend to ourselves that we have improved, when a lot of times things in history, it's like in Asian philosophy, they say time doesn't work in a straight line. It's just things work in a spiral. So everything that Monica's talking about, things coming back up for review. In addition to that, I think some of them are like ancient hatreds. There's so many levels of all of this.
Joan, what can we do about it?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. It's really hard because we have kind of retreated into our safe spaces, which doesn't create a safe raider space. People are more and more hanging out with people that are like them. It's Bowling Alone started that pattern, but there's a tendency for us to stay with people we're comfortable being with, and not go out of our comfort zone for who we'll talk to honestly about things. And I believe that we are going to have to collectively decide that we don't like where we're at right now. And my hair's on fire this year in the US about trust in elections, because we know when it comes to November, whether it is either candidate win, there's going to be tens of millions of people that question the validity of that election. Now, my progressive friends will have one set of answers. My conservative friends will have a different set. But the reality is that we have a lot of shared aspirations, and that fairness is a shared value. And we have, over 6 months where we could conceivably create greater trust in our election processes, take responsibility locally because elections are local. And then because of what we're doing right now, we're talking from all around the country and even another part of the world. We can get people together across the country. You can create trust locally and then create trust nationally, which is a huge ask. And it is scary, but we can do it if we chose to, and we could do it en masse. We have learned that these conversations by video can be deep. And it's the beginning, it's not the end. We have lost trust, not just in elections, we've lost trust in the government, we've lost trust in the media, we've lost trust in each other. I could go on with that list. And societies that are successful have high levels of trust. And that's, one of the reasons we've lost all sorts of potential wonderful candidates, because they don't trust the community around them to support them, to take care of them, to take care of their families. If you step up to be a candidate these days, it's not just you that may get disrespected and threatened. It's also your partner, it's your children, which is, something that is a huge loss for everyone. We're talking about this at school boards. We're talking about this about people that run elections. So we're allowing a small subset of our communities to undermine our basic structures. And the question is, what's the intervention we can do? And I think we're going to have to do it together. With living room conversations, we've got a piece of the puzzle, but it's so much more than that. And there's actually a very large bridging movement that's most people aren't aware of, that's here in the US, but it's also international. And this is, classic peace building, work on something together where you want to achieve. So I think this is a call to action for the US this year that we need to step into. And I hope that there are call to actions elsewhere also that can focus on our aspirations together and begin to build trust, because I think our media has been benefiting from the fact that human beings pay more attention to things that cause us fear, anger, and anxiety. It's just human design, because that which threatens us is the thing we have to watch out for. Well, media's taken advantage of that. How do we own our world again? And, we have a mental health problem. I could go on, though. I will let others take on from here. Thank you.
I think that what Joan has started with the living room conversations is so important. I think it's not only our coming together, but the place we speak from when we do, the sort of skills of nonviolent communication. Martin Luther King said you have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt. So people can subconsciously feel it when you're talking down to them. And I think there's this smug, self-righteous arrogance on the left these days, every bit as much as the smug, self-righteous arrogance on the right. This assumption, I'm right. If you disagree with me, you're wrong. And you should shut up. You should sit down. Like, people need to remember, we all own this country. Nobody owes it to you to agree with you. It's that kind of namaste consciousness. If you salute in your own heart You just salute the person. It's all done in your head, the inner power. Now that the 21st century is, we're introducing, the 20th century was so mechanistic, so overly externalized, everything about external systems. We're coming back into balance now. It's not just what you do. Everything we do is infused with the consciousness with which we do it. That's why Gandhi said the end is inherent in the means. So when we join each other for conversation, last night I spoke in Vancouver, Washington, and it was really great. For whatever reason, the people in that room, they were like us, there's so much of this is now in the air, and people really have moved forward, and we got deep, the Israel and Palestine stuff and all kinds of stuff, but it was really touching to me, the effort that everybody could appreciate in the room, the emotional tenor of the conversation we're having. And within that space, it was actually very moving. So I do believe people are coming, maybe we're not at a critical mass yet, but it doesn't even matter if we ourselves seek to practice it, that the space, people, there's a line in the Course in Miracles that says, people hear you. People hear you on the level you speak to them from. So I think as we move into this more nonviolent place within ourselves, the capacity to have conversation that really goes somewhere and which everyone feels emotionally protected, then we can get deep in ways that we otherwise could not do.
And I'm
Thank
sorry
you.
to see that someone is attempting to undermine this conversation right now. That's kind of sad.
And it's a male's voice.
It is rather funny, actually.
Manifa, if I can bring you in there, and I'm really thinking of the personal cost it takes. We're talking here about the courage that's needed. How do you think we can best support each other as women in coming into the space to do the work that's needed and to confront? So predictable. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm sure that Becca is dealing with that. So Manifa, I'd just love to hear on you about how we personally sustain ourselves as we step into this space.
Well, we have to have honest conversations, I think, and where we don't necessarily always have time to have those conversations. We're really pulling back, again, all the intersectionality that I was talking about earlier. If we don't have an honest conversation about race and white supremacy, then we can't advance as women as a whole. It is one of the functions of white supremacist patriarchy to create and maintain these divisions. And we talk about trust and building trust. I mean, the trust was never there. Again, speaking again, not in ancient history, but my own grandmother died from breast cancer because she was turned away from a hospital. She was refused treatment in Texas. And we're not ancient people. And so this is recent history of this country. And so we need to talk about the present. We have members of the U.S. Congress currently. I'm thinking of people like Cori Bush, the type of attacks that she receives, that we see emails, DMs that she gets. I'm sure Marion gets very similar stuff, but it is horrible, terrible, nasty stuff, right? Even on this Zoom call, I'm getting all kind of DM chat messages in the Zoom chat directly to me about why do I have pronouns next to my name and these types of things. So I think that as women, as progressive women, we need to come together and have some really honest conversations about, not nostalgia of the past, but really showing the naked truth of what the situation is, and that democracy is an aspiration, right? It's an aspiration. The Voting Rights Act only passed in 1965, right? Like we are not even 100 years out of a Voting Rights Act, everyone.
And it's been gutted.
And it's being gutted as we speak. So when we talk about quote unquote preserving the democracy, if we want to bring in all women, we have to talk about like what we really have and what that aspiration is, and how we're going to fight these varying systems of oppression together. Because if I come to a space and you're like, I only want to deal with access to abortion and not the fact that Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth in one of the wealthiest nations on the planet, I don't want to stay in the meeting, right? So we have to bring these issues together if we're going to move forward. And so that's my main thesis on how we can build power, maintain it as women overall.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on this issue of trust. And of course, something that further undermines trust is the fact that politicians are now lying, saying things that are palpably untrue. And how do we, who hold a completely different set of values, deal with that and deal with the media that amplifies and propagates those lies?
In
We can
American
expose them now. Politicians have always lied, but go ahead.
American politics, there's a political media industrial complex. So like when Monica was saying that democracy, it's never been fully actualized. It's aspirational. We've had some brilliant moments in our country's history of people standing for the full actualization, but there are always in every generation forces which mitigate against it. Politics should be the conduit for the expression of our will, and certainly the conduit for the expression of the better angels of our nature. But today, the conduit itself is so corrupted. I have seen dishonor, lack of integrity, corruption, real get down dirty, what Monica was saying about some really nasty stuff out there. Corey talking about, getting death threats and all that. I have had a lot of experience in my life, but I've never seen anything like it. And it's a real crisis because if the container is that impure, if the container, politics itself is that dark and ugly, how are we ever going to collectively express our light? I think on an individual basis, these conversations like we're having here today are happening. They are happening. I think we're having a tenor of conversation even right now that I don't think 20 years ago would have been quite this evolved. We're moving forward as individuals. But it's a real crisis that collectively, in the collective space that's specifically political, that we are not able, that we are being so stymied. Now, I know a lot of us would say, well, we're all working in our own individual ways. I mean, the women on this call are certainly examples. But I don't think we can forget that it's in politics where some levers of power, like when Monica was saying about not accepting Medicaid, that's because of the governor of that state, or closing down hospitals, so we know that elected officials do matter. So we have to get into politics if we're going to actually have access to those levers. I think the majority of Americans would say, or at least I think actually a majority of Americans would say, take the Medicaid. This is ridiculous. The money is there for poor people and you're not going to give these kids lunch. That's not where the problem is. Martin Luther King said the American people are far more compassionate than the US Congress. It's the sclerotic political system. So I think we all need to, all I can do is just report from the belly of the beast. Like Joan was saying, the media, I know in my case, for instance, I was completely blacklisted from CNN this time, completely blacklisted from MSNBC. How do you run for president as a Democrat if you're not on CNN and MSNBC? That means that people don't even know you're there. And it's like state TV or the Democratic Party kicking me off ballots. Now, it's not about me personally. I don't even think that's about me being a woman. That's about me not being in their club. This is a crisis of our democracy. And I think sometimes in the book, Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke, he says sometimes when you don't know the answer, you just have to sit with the question and live with the question. And it's an uncomfortable question, but we need to We need to sit with it, and all of us follow our own hearts about where we feel that that should lead us and how we should be guided to participate. But we need to know it's that bad. And I feel that my being in the belly of that beast right now, I feel a function I have is to kind of a Paul Revere for all of you to know it is that bad. It's really dark. It's not just what Monica said, but with the death threats and all that. That's terrible, terrible, terrible. And it extends into making sure you're not in the conversation if you're not convenient to the patriarchy.
And it also involves, I noticed that you're always described as a self-help author.
Exactly.
Not
Perfect
a New
example.
York Times
So
bestseller.
isn't that interesting? Anything to diminish you. Long shot candidate, self-help author. You know, there's a term, contempt prior to investigation. People opining about my books who clearly haven't read them. I defy anyone to read my book, Politics of Love or Healing of America, Healing the Soul of America, and call me a self-help author. You're absolutely right. And they would never do that to a man. It was an easy way to diminish me. That's exactly right. And they didn't have that last time. These are talking points. This is psyops. Psyops is scary. They have ways, but it's so much easier with a woman to create a narrative so that you can't possibly take her seriously. That's another thing, unserious candidate. They say I'm unserious because they know how serious I am. I'm talking about hungry people. I'm talking about racial and criminal injustice. I'm talking about the things that you're not supposed to. You can talk about them. They don't even mind if you write books about them. They don't even mind if you have nonprofits based on them, but don't you dare try to get any actual political power. We're coming after you. And that is the way it works today.
Thank you. And I just, before we go to questions from all of you out there, and I've seen some questions, but please do post them. We wanted to discuss today the role women have as peacemakers, and obviously we have conflict and horrific scenes across the world right now. I just wondered if anyone wanted to say something about peace, and particularly about the role that we as women can play in creating it.
I will note that in doing living room conversations and working in the bridging movement, I do see more women showing up. The living room conversations team is definitely leaning strongly towards women. And there seems to be a draw there. And I think we need to have the men in the room too for this. But when I started doing this work, I thought of it as collaborative problem solving for the big problems we have, that we need to have everyone's best ideas in the room and we need to have healthy conflict. We now talk about this as strengthening democracy. That's become a term of art in the bridging space, and peace building. It's classic peace building, which is done internationally. And the US didn't think it needed peace building. And more we're recognizing that we do.
There are four.
Go ahead.
There are four factors statistically which will indicate a higher incidence of peace and a lower incidence of violence, whether it's in a corner of an American city or another corner of the world. And those four factors are greater economic opportunities for women, greater educational opportunities for children, a reduction of violence against women, and the amelioration of unnecessary human despair. We need to proactively create peace. We need to learn to wage peace. That needs to be a shift in our thinking. We need peace games as well as war games. We need a peace academy of peace builders as well as a military academy so that we can have an army of peace builders as well as an army, obviously, of military personnel. That's why we should have a Department of Peace. And we will have, that will be an opportunity for us on a political level when more and more of us realize, just like you can't just treat sickness, you have to learn to proactively create health. We need to move now into that same, sickness is the absence of health. Health is not the absence of sickness. And war and violence is the absence of peace. And you know, okay, and I'm quoting Martin Luther King a lot, but anytime you're talking about nonviolent political philosophy, that's where you go. And he said that there are two kinds of peace, negative peace and positive peace. And negative peace is where there might not be an outright conflict, but there's underlying tension and anxiety because of inherent injustices, etc. He said positive peace can only be predicated on brotherhood and justice. And that's why I also think this. I also think far more people in this society and in this world love than hate. But those who hate today hate with conviction. And like Monica was talking about white supremacists, etc. I mean, they're out in full force and they have conviction, and conviction is a force multiplier. And I think those of us who love need to display as much conviction as is displayed by those who hate. If you have 10 people who actively hate and then 90 people who kind of casually love but won't really put any skin in the game or really stand up and say that, you know, the hard part out loud, then hatred will win. So I think that's we need to make more of a commitment to a peaceful world. We're going to have a violent world until we commit to a nonviolent world.
Thank you. Right, we're going to go to some questions from the chat. Manifa, I'm just going to read out the first question I can see, which is something I've noticed is that people who are not compassionate are so loud and others get drowned out because they're so humble. It makes me think that does compassion become dominant? How can compassion become dominant in a society built on something entirely different? All this speaking from experience. So what do we do when the voices of hate are so loud?
Yeah, I think the voices of hate have a bigger platform. You know, I really believe that our folks are screaming from the rooftops that they have. If we see the protests of 2020, it was the largest in the streets protest mobilization that the United States has ever seen, ever in June of 2020. You know, there were folks rallying in all 50 states, right? But you can always have folks who, of course, uphold the status quo, aren't a threat to white supremacy. The voices are louder because they're more amplified, right? They get the platforms, they get listened to. You know, the woman on my block who is speaking out and speaking up every day, you don't know her name, you know, she's not getting on the networks like Marianne was talking about, you know, but who gets on the networks, you know, Moms for Liberty gets on the networks. So I think some of it is that these voices are being platformed in a way that makes them louder. And we can't, you know, we can't move away from the fact that that's grounded in these oppressive systems, right? That the systems themselves calibrate in a way to preserve the hierarchies in those systems. And that means giving more access to certain voices than the other. People aren't suffering in silence. Doesn't matter if they're here in the United States or around the world. You know, another question was about the thousands of children in Gaza, right? The thousands upon thousands and millions of children that are suffering around the world, you know, are suffering, are non-white children, right? Like if you saw a similar situation of what's happening to children in the Congo happening in France, right? It's just the lack of empathy wouldn't be there. There's a lack of empathy. There's a platforming of voices because there is more care and sympathy towards lives based in this hierarchy of white supremacy, right? So yes, those voices seem loud. They seem like the people who are righteous aren't speaking up, but the righteous are speaking up. I mean, we heard Dr. Martin Luther King quoted, "How loud is that?" And he was assassinated, right? So we have to talk about that there is a silencing that's happening, you know, and not that these other voices are louder or more powerful. It's that the other voices are silenced. They're either not platformed, they're violent, they're taken out. Those voices are taken out, right? So, you know, that's kind of what I want to offer to that question.
Yeah, when Joan was talking about funding, you have a lot of billionaires in America today funding the voices of hate. You don't have as many billionaires funding the voices of love.
We are unfortunately drawing near the end of this. There's one question that's been asked a couple of times in different ways, and I wondered if we could finish on a round on that, and then either one action or something to be hopeful about, so that we all leave energized and not too despairing about what we've heard. So the question in the chat is, how do you keep going? How do you personally sustain yourself in such a difficult environment? And then if you can each answer that and then add on either an action that people can take or something that makes you feel hopeful and positive. Who wants to go first? Joan?
Okay. I sustain myself with basically being outside and appreciating the clouds, and there are flowers right now. It's a beautiful world still, and I'm grateful for it. And the thing that we can do is become good connectors ourselves. And it's listening and developing relationships that are connective with people, where we can hold the tension of our differences and start to find a path towards our shared aspirations. And that's a big ask, but I'm finding it incredibly gratifying because I learn in the process, and it's reassuring to learn that most people have aspirations that are very similar to mine. And those voices, those ones that are platformed that are so disturbing, it's not the norm. At least that's my experience of people as I have that opportunity to go beyond what's, most comfortable right next door.
Thank you. Marianne, if you could take 1 minute to sum up.
For me, the issue lies in faith. The greatest social justice movements in the United States were based in spiritual and religious places. Among white people in the abolitionist movement, the whole movement emerged from the early evangelical churches in New Hampshire. The women who were leaders of the women's suffragist movement were religious Quakers. And of course, Dr. King was a Baptist preacher. So there's something about believing in a world as yet unseen. So for me, the faith that humanity is going to get there. I might not see it, but humanity is going to get there, and everything any of us do to push, anything any of us do to push it's not about us personally, whether we're the ones who get to see it, but just knowing that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice, and our purpose on this earth is to help bend it. So to me, my personal motto is pray in the morning and kick ass in the afternoon. Take care of your morning practice, ground your own nervous system in that which is true and good and holy and beautiful. And then things emerge in your life, in your own behavior, that will be a reflection of the inner work that you did.
Thank you so much. And unfortunately, it looks like we've lost Manifa, whom I hoped was going to give the final words. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your inspiration. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for all the actions. And I guess the thing I would leave everyone with is it's always better if you do something. It's so easy in this age to feel despair and to feel that there is no hope. But the moment you take action, the moment you reach out, the moment you connect, the moment you join, then you realize that change is possible. As Marianne said, maybe not right when we want it, but over the arc of time. Thank you all, and a very happy and strong International Women's Day to everyone who joined us.
Yeah, happy Women's Day. May we all be closer to other women.
Happy Women's Day.
God bless everybody. Thank you, Jennifer, for putting this together.
Thank you for being with us. Thank you, Joan.
Everyone.
Thank you.